The room was almost dark when she reached for me. Half the hallway lights were off for the night shift, and the only sound was the soft hum of her oxygen concentrator and the rain pressing against the window like it wanted to come inside. I was tucking the blanket under her shoulder the way she liked it. Not too tight, not too loose, when her hand closed around my wrist. Not weakly. Not the way her chart said it should. She pulled me down toward her face and whispered something I almost dismissed as confusion. A word. Then a name. Then a number. And then, very clearly, the word drawer. I froze because nothing about her voice in that moment sounded confused. It sounded like instruction. My name is Hannah. I was 26 that year, working the overnight shift at a memory care facility just outside Hartford, Connecticut, splitting a small one-bedroom apartment with my mother, who had been sick for almost 2 years. I didn't grow up planning to be a nursing home aide. Nobody does, I think. I had been in community college for medical assisting, 2 semesters away from finishing, when my mother's kidneys started failing and the bills started arriving faster than I could open the envelopes. I paused school. I took the first job that paid weekly and let me work nights so I could drive her to dialysis in the mornings. That job became 3 years. The night shift on a memory care floor has a sound all its own. The big overhead lights go off around 10. The little night lights in each room glow a low amber color, and the hallway turns into something almost holy. You can hear the building breathing. The heating system, the ice machine at the end of the corridor, the squeak of the cleaning cart, the way one resident calls out for her sister in her sleep every single night, and the way another one hums a hymn I've never been able to identify. Most of the aides I trained with didn't last 6 months. They said it was depressing. They said the residents didn't even know they were there. I never felt that way. I felt the opposite. I felt like the rest of the world had forgotten these people, and somebody had to keep showing up anyway. That somebody, for 13 rooms on the East Wing, was me. Before I keep going, I want to step out of the story for just a second, because I've been carrying this one for a long time, and I'd rather not tell it into the dark. I'm curious where you're listening from tonight. Are you in the kitchen, in your car, in bed with the light off? And if any of this is already feeling familiar, if you've ever loved someone older than you who was being slowly written off by their own family, I'd really love to hear about them in the comments. You don't have to use names. Just tell me who they were to you. And if you'd like to keep hearing stories like this one, quiet women, real stakes, slow justice, go ahead and tap subscribe so the next one finds you. Okay, let me go back to that hallway. I met Eleanor on a Tuesday in March. I remember because the floor had just been mopped and the disinfectant smelled like green apples, which I always hated. She came in on a wheelchair she clearly didn't need, wearing a pressed cream blouse and pearl earrings, with a silver bob cut so neat it looked architectural. She was 81. She was carrying a small tan leather handbag in her lap, and when the intake nurse reached for it, Eleanor lifted her chin 1 degree and said, "I'll keep that, thank you." That was the first sentence I ever heard her say. She corrected the intake nurse's grammar twice during the paperwork. She thanked the janitor by name within the first 10 minutes. She'd read it off his name tag and used it like she'd known him for years. Her son, a tall man in a charcoal suit with an expensive watch, signed her in, kissed the top of her head, and was back in the elevator within 12 minutes. I counted. I always counted, with the new ones. 12 minutes is not a goodbye. 12 minutes is a drop-off. Over the months that followed, Eleanor and I fell into something I didn't have a word for at the time. She taught me how to fold a cloth napkin into something called a bishop's hat. She taught me that a real thank you note never starts with the word thank. She showed me the difference between a good fountain pen and a cheap one by letting me write my name with both. In winter, I started bringing her a small bowl of warm water in the evenings so she could rest her hands in it before bed, because the cold made her knuckles ache, and she never asked. But she always smiled when she saw it. And somewhere in there, without either of us announcing it, I realized that the sharpest, most fully present mind on that entire floor belonged to the woman everyone else had already decided was finished. It was 11 weeks before I saw any of Eleanor's children again. I know that because she counted. Every Sunday evening, she would turn the page of her little leather-bound calendar and tap the date with the tip of her pen, and one Sunday I noticed she had drawn a small dot in the corner of the square the day her son last visited. The dots had stacked up. 11 of them. So when Roger and Marcy finally walked back onto the floor that afternoon, I noticed two things before I noticed anything else. The first was that they came together, which Eleanor had told me they almost never did. The second was that they had brought a photographer. A real one, with a soft black camera bag and a portable light, who introduced himself politely to the front desk as if this were a wedding. Roger was in his mid-50s, tall, expensively dressed in that careful way that pretends not to be expensive. A navy cashmere sweater, dark jeans, a watch I'd seen advertised in a magazine in the break room. Marcy was a few years younger, blonde at the roots in a deliberate way, with a leather tote that probably cost more than my rent. They greeted Eleanor like they were performing a scene they had rehearsed in the car. "Mom, you look wonderful." Marcy fluffed the pillow behind Eleanor's head. "Doesn't she look wonderful?" The photographer started setting up near the window. "They wanted a Christmas card," Roger explained. "A family. You know, Mom would want that." Eleanor smiled the way she smiled at strangers in elevators. They took 12 shots. Roger crouched beside her wheelchair. Marcy stood behind, one hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor did not lift her own hand to cover Marcy's. When the photographer left, the two of them asked me to step out so they could speak privately with the director about, in Roger's words, Mom's situation. I said of course. I walked down the hallway, around the corner, and into the linen closet that shared a wall with the director's office, and I started restocking towels very slowly. I didn't have to strain. The wall was thin and Roger spoke like a man who assumed nobody important was listening. "And how long does this kind of decline usually last?" "Roughly." "I'm only asking because we need to plan." He asked whether Eleanor still had what he called decision-making capacity per the chart. He asked it in a tone that suggested he was hoping for a particular answer. Marcy mentioned, almost in passing, that they'd been speaking to a realtor, just to understand options. Nobody in that office was talking about her like she was alive. I stood there with a folded white towel against my chest and felt my whole body go quiet. Not angry yet, just quiet. The way water goes still right before it freezes. I went back to the cart, finished my rounds, and that night, after my shift, I bought a small spiral notebook from the gas station on my way home. The kind with a green cover. I started writing things down. That same evening, when I brought Eleanor her warm water, she let me sit for a moment beside her bed. She looked at me with those very awake eyes of hers and said, "Did Roger ask about my capacity again?" I didn't answer right away. She gave a small smile that wasn't really a smile. "It's all right, dear. You don't have to lie." She told me, in that low evening voice of hers, that she had stopped trusting her own children the year her husband died. Marcy had quietly slipped Eleanor's wedding ring off the dresser one afternoon, claiming she wanted to have it cleaned for her. The ring never came back. When Eleanor asked, Marcy said the jeweler was still working on it. That was 9 years ago. "I let her keep it," Eleanor said softly, "not because I forgave her, because I wanted to see what else she would take if she thought I hadn't noticed." I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing, and she patted my hand, which she rarely did. A few nights later, while I was straightening her shelves, she asked me a question that, at the time, I didn't fully understand. "Henna, do you remember my old jewelry box? The wooden one with the brass corners?" I told her yes. It was on the high shelf. She asked me to bring it down. I lifted it carefully. It was heavier than it looked. Dark walnut, the brass at the corners gone soft and dull with age. I placed it in her lap. She didn't open it. She just rested her hand on the top of it for a long moment, with her eyes closed, and then she said, very quietly, almost to herself, "Good. They didn't take this one." I waited for her to explain. She didn't. She only asked me to put it back exactly where I'd found it. I did. The next morning, when I came in for the overlap shift, there was a new note in Eleanor's chart. It was signed by the director and read, in that flat clinical font, "Family reports increasing confusion and difficulty tracking conversations." The date on the note was the same day Eleanor had completed the Sunday crossword in pen, in under 40 minutes, and corrected the obituary section's misuse of the word, whom. I stood at the chart station for a long time, just looking at it. Then I quietly took out my phone and I photographed the note. After that, I photographed my own night shift log from the same date. The one where I had written, in my own handwriting, that Mrs. E was alert, oriented, in good spirits, discussing 1970s opera. I didn't show it to anyone yet, I just kept the photo, and I went back to her room. The storm came in on a Thursday. By 8 in the evening, The wind had stripped the last leaves off the trees in the courtyard, and by 9, half the east wing had lost overhead power. The emergency lights kicked in along the baseboards, soft and amber, the kind that make everything feel like a memory while you're still inside it. I brought Eleanor an extra blanket and a second pillow. She was sitting up against her headboard, the wooden jewelry box on the bedside table beside her, which struck me as odd because she normally kept it on the shelf. Her hair was brushed. Her hands were folded. She looked, I remember thinking, prepared. She watched me settle the blanket around her legs, and then she reached for my wrist, the way she had that other night, only this time her grip was firmer. Sit down, Hannah. I sat on the edge of the bed. I'm going to tell you something, she said. And I need you to listen carefully, and I need you not to write it down yet. Do you understand? I nodded. I have been waiting a long time, she said, to be sure of someone. I'm sure of you. I felt the back of my throat get warm. I didn't speak. I was afraid that if I spoke, she would change her mind and stop. She leaned in. Her voice dropped to that whisper, the same whisper from the first night, only this time every word was deliberate. The will my children believe in, she said. The one from 2009. That document is no longer valid. I wrote a new one, 18 months ago, by hand, witnessed by 2 people, neither of them family. It is hidden inside the lining of this jewelry box, underneath the felt panel at the bottom. My lawyer is Mr. Halberg, Stein and Associates on Asylum Avenue. You will remember that. She made me repeat it back to her. The lawyer's name, the street, the location of the panel. I repeated it twice. She nodded once, satisfied, and let go of my wrist. I sat there in the amber light trying to hold myself steady. Finally, I asked the question that had been climbing up my throat the whole time. Why me? She looked at me for a long moment. Because, she said, I have been watching you for 3 years. I watched you bring Mrs. Calloway a cup of tea every Tuesday, even after she stopped knowing who you were. I watched you return a $5 bill that fell out of Mr. Levine's coat pocket when there was nobody in the hall but you. I watched you correct the new aide who was speaking to Mrs. Park like she was a child. Character Hannah shows up in small, unwatched moments. And almost no one is ever watching. I started crying then. Quietly, the way you cry when you don't want a patient to be the one comforting you. She reached over and squeezed my hand once, and let go. I don't want this, I said. I don't want money. I just want to keep being your aide. She smiled. That, she said, is exactly why it has to be you. She told me not to touch the box yet, not to open it, not to remove anything. The will was to stay where it was until the right moment, and when that moment came, it would be opened only with Mr. Halberg present, and only with witnesses in the room. She was very clear about that. Witnesses, she said, and make a document. I went home that morning after my shift and I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed for almost an hour, still in my scrubs, and I thought about everything she had told me, and everything she had not. The next day, Roger came to the floor unannounced. He had a man with him I hadn't seen before, younger than him, in a suit that didn't quite fit at the shoulders, carrying a brown leather folder. I caught the label on the tab as I passed in the hallway. POA, revisions, power of attorney, revisions. I stepped into the staff bathroom, locked the door, and texted my cousin Lena, who worked as a paralegal at a small estate firm 2 towns over. I kept the text short. Need to talk. Tonight, it's about my resident. She wrote back in 4 minutes. A dinner at 7, my place. Bring everything you've written down. I slid the phone back into my pocket, washed my face once with cold water, and walked back out onto the floor. Eleanor's door was closed. Roger and the man with the folder were inside. My notebook stopped being a notebook somewhere around the 4th week. By then it was a system. I had a column for the date, a column for the time, a column for who entered Eleanor's room, what they said, what she said back, what she was doing when they arrived, and how oriented she appeared on a small 1:5 scale I had borrowed from one of the standardized intake forms at work. I noted the medications I administered by name and dose and initialed each entry. I logged the crossword answers she gave me without looking at the page. Castellet, Vicusoise, Mistral, Etruscan. Alina had told me very calmly, over a plate of reheated lasagna in her tiny kitchen, that contemporaneous notes. Notes written at the time of an event by a person with no financial interest were one of the most powerful pieces of evidence a probate court could see. So I kept writing. Once a week, I photocopied the new pages at the public library on my way home. sealed the copies in an envelope, addressed it to myself, and mailed it. Lena had explained that the postmark created a sealed, dated record I could not have backdated. I started a small stack of those envelopes in my closet, unopened. The family began pressing harder. Marcy cornered me in the staff break room one afternoon, holding 2 coffees, smiling like we had been friends for years. She slid one across the table to me. "Hannah, right?" "Yes, Mom. Mom talks about you all the time," she said. Did she? I thought. Eleanor had never once mentioned Marcy talking about me. I just wanted to ask, does she ever mention, money or papers? She used to have this old lawyer she'd go on about. Halpern, something like that. She mostly talks about your father. I said evenly, she misses him. Marcy's smile thinned at the corners. She reached into her tote, slid a folded $50 bill across the table toward my hand, and said very softly, "If anything specific comes up, I'd really appreciate a heads up. As family?" I looked at the 50. I looked at her. I picked it up, walked across the break room to the glass donations jar by the door, the one labeled Resident Activity Fund, and slid the 50 inside. I asked the kitchen supervisor, who was making coffee 3 feet away, to please note in the donations log that the 50 had been contributed by Marcy Whitcomb that afternoon. She wrote it down. Marcy didn't move. I went back to my shift. That night Lena laughed for almost a full minute when I told her. "You don't even understand what you just did," she said. "You created a documented attempted bribe of a fiduciary caregiver. Keep going." Lena was 3 years older than me. She had a paralegal certificate, a tired-looking blazer she wore to court, and the cleanest legal pad I had ever seen. She walked me through, step by step, what a properly handwritten and witnessed will, a holographic codicil, could legally do in our state. She explained what a capacity evaluation involved, why the nursing home's official notes mattered, and why the doctored family report's increasing confusion line in the chart was, in her words, a gift waiting to be unwrapped. "Don't touch the box," she told me. "Don't even look in it, but make sure no one else can touch it either." The next morning, I went to the director's office and respectfully requested, on Eleanor's behalf, that her personal items not be removed from her room without her verbal consent in the presence of 2 staff witnesses. I cited Eleanor's existing signed standing instructions from intake. The director frowned. She started to say something about family rights. Eleanor, who had been wheeled in at her own request, looked up calmly and recited her own full date of birth, the current president of the United States, the name of the sitting governor, the director's full name, the address of her former home including the zip code, and the name of the facility's nursing supervisor. "I assume," Eleanor said pleasantly, "that satisfies your concerns about my capacity to make this request." The director signed the addendum. 3 staff witnessed it. I made sure my photo of the signed page was time-stamped to within the minute. 2 days later, a new letter appeared in Eleanor's chart. It was on the letterhead of a doctor I had never seen on our floor. It described Eleanor as showing marked cognitive decline, with intermittent disorientation to person and place. It was dated for a Sunday, and on that Sunday, per my own log, Eleanor had finished the New York Times crossword in pen, told me a long story about seeing Maria Callas perform in 1971, and corrected my pronunciation of the word, provincial. I photographed the letter. I sent the photo to Lena. She wrote back within 10 minutes. "Now," she wrote, "we have something." The family meeting was set for a Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon, in the small conference room on the 2nd floor of the facility. I know it was a Wednesday because Eleanor asked me to do her hair that morning, and she only ever asked on Wednesdays. Roger had organized it. He had sent a formal email to the director, copied to the staff coordinator, requesting a family conference regarding our mother's long-term care and asset planning. He arrived 10 minutes early with his hired lawyer, the younger man in the not-quite-fitting suit, whose name I now knew was Mr. Calderon, and the doctor whose name had appeared on the decline letter. Marcy came in just behind them, in a black knit dress and pearls, looking like she was already practicing her funeral face. Eleanor was wheeled in by another aide. She was wearing a soft gray cardigan and a small gold brooch shaped like a leaf. She had asked me to be the one present in the room, as her assigned aide, for continuity of care. The director allowed it. I sat in the chair just behind and to the left of her wheelchair, with my hands folded in my lap and my phone face up on the table in front of me. We are a one-party consent state. I knew that. Lena had made sure I knew that. Roger opened the meeting by thanking everyone for coming. Marcy spoke next, before Eleanor had even fully settled into the room. As you all know, Mom's been struggling lately. Marcy began, in that voice people use when they are speaking for someone who is sitting 3 feet away from them. We feel, Roger and I both feel, that the right thing for her care moving forward is to sell the family home. The maintenance, the property taxes, it's not sustainable. And of course, all proceeds would be earmarked for Mom's care. The Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. I saw it. The doctor didn't. Eleanor tried to speak. I would like to. Roger reached over, patted her hand, and said warmly, Mom, let us handle this. You don't have to worry about any of it. She tried again a moment later. I'd prefer. Marcy laughed lightly, looked at Mr. Calderon, and said, she gets confused around new faces. It's been worse the last few weeks. I watched Eleanor's eyes move, very slowly, from Marcy to me. There was nothing confused in them. There was something I can only describe as air recording. I reached forward, tapped the screen of my phone, and pressed the small red circle. The phone made no sound. The screen showed the timer beginning. I left it sitting on the table, face up. Marcy was getting frustrated. Eleanor's calm gaze unsettled her in a way I don't think Marcy had expected. And then Marcy said the sentence that, even now, years later, I can still hear in the exact pitch of her voice. Honestly, Mom, you're already gone. We're just doing the paperwork early. The room went silent for a full beat. The doctor coughed. Mr. Calderon's pen paused above his legal pad. Roger looked at his sister with an expression that was not horror. It was annoyance, because she had said the quiet part out loud. Eleanor did not cry. I have replayed that moment in my head many times, and I want to tell you very precisely what I saw. Her eyes did not water. They sharpened. The way a lens sharpens when you turn the ring. I quietly glanced at my watch. Roughly 14 p.m. to Eleanor looked across the table at her 2 children. She took one slow breath. Then she said, in a voice that was almost gentle, thank you for being so clear. That was all. She turned her head a quarter inch toward me. Hannah, she said. And she used my full name. Would you please wheel me back to my room? Thank you, Mr. Calderon, for your time today. I stood. I picked up my phone. I unlocked the brake on her chair. I wheeled her out. As we passed through the doorway, I heard Roger say to the doctor, under his breath, see, she didn't even understand half of it. Eleanor's mouth moved, very faintly. Almost a smile. Back in her room, with the door closed behind us, she asked me to bring her the phone on the bedside table. Not her cell phone. The landline. She asked me to dial a number she recited from memory, 10 digits, with no hesitation. I dialed. I handed her the receiver. Mr. Halberg, please, she said. This is Eleanor Whitcomb. A pause. Then her voice, smooth as I had ever heard it. It's time. Please come this Friday. Yes, yes. With the associate and a notary. 3 o'clock. Thank you. She hung up. She looked at me. Her eyes were tired, but they were burning quietly. Now, she said, we don't rush. Now we prepare. Mr. Halberg arrived on Friday at exactly 2:58 in the afternoon. I remember because I was watching the clock the way you watch a kettle. He was somewhere in his late 70s, with a head of carefully combed white hair, a navy suit that did fit perfectly at the shoulders, and a small leather briefcase that looked like it had been with him longer than I had been alive. He greeted Eleanor with both of his hands wrapped around one of hers and called her my dear friend. And Eleanor's whole face changed in a way I had not seen in months. He had brought 2 people with him. A younger associate, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, carrying a second briefcase, and a notary public, a calm woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, carrying her own stamp and seal in a small zippered case. Mr. Halberg asked Eleanor whether she would like me to remain in the room. She said yes, very firmly. He asked permission to place a small digital recorder on the side table for the purposes of documenting the meeting. She gave it. Eleanor, he said gently, before anything else, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Is that all right? She smiled. Please. He asked her what day it was, the month, the year, the name of the current president, the governor, the mayor of the town we were sitting in. He asked her the full name of her late husband, the year they had married, the address of the home they had lived in for 41 years, the name of her accountant, her primary care doctor, the rough total value of her estate within an acceptable range. He asked her to name her 2 children, and to say in her own words what she thought of each of them. She answered every question slowly, precisely, and with one dry remark about Roger's haircut that made the notary actually laugh out loud. The notary signed her capacity acknowledgement. The recorder kept recording. The associate took independent written notes. Then Mr. Halberg turned to me. Hannah, would you please bring Mrs. Whitcomb the wooden jewelry box from the shelf? My hands shook a little when I lifted it down. I placed it gently on the bed in front of Eleanor. She looked at me and nodded once. I lifted the lid. Inside, on top, were 2 strings of pearls, a pair of small ruby earrings, and a brass key. I removed them carefully and set them on a folded cloth on the side table. The bottom of the box was lined with a dark green felt panel. I slid my fingernail under one corner. It lifted easily, as if it had been lifted before. Underneath, folded in thirds, was a sheet of heavy cream paper, slightly yellowed at the edges, with handwriting in dark blue fountain pen ink across both sides. Mr. Halberg gloved his hands with 2 clean cotton gloves from his briefcase, lifted the document, and read it in silence for nearly 3 full minutes. Then he looked up at Eleanor and nodded once. Yes, he said. This is what we drafted. He explained calmly for the recording what the document was. A holographic codicil, written entirely in Eleanor's own hand, dated 18 months earlier, signed by Eleanor in the presence of 2 witnesses. One of them a Mrs. Patricia Doyle, the widow of the facility's late chaplain, and the other a longtime friend named Margaret Lynn, both of whom were named in attached witness declarations Mr. Halberg also produced from his briefcase. The codicil explicitly revoked the prior 2009 will. Then he read the contents aloud. The family home was not to be sold privately. It was to be donated to a community foundation in the name of Eleanor's late husband, to be converted, over time, into a small library wing for first-generation college students. The bulk of her liquid assets were divided in specific bequests. A hospice that had cared for her sister, a scholarship fund at her alma mater, 2 longtime friends who had visited her regularly for decades, and 1 modest sum to Mrs. Doyle, the chaplain's widow. To Roger and Marcy, she left a fixed sum each, large enough to be considered a meaningful inheritance, small enough that no one would ever mistake it for the bulk of her estate. The codicil included, in her own handwriting, the phrases sufficient, not generous. To me, she left a small, structured education fund. Enough to finish my degree. Enough to begin again. I didn't hear the last part right away. My ears had stopped working in that strange way they do when the floor moves under you. Mr. Halberg had to repeat it. I looked at Eleanor. She reached for my hand and held it the way she had held it on the night of the whisper. This is not payment, Hannah, she said. This is permission. Finish school? I started crying then. I didn't try to hide it. Mr. Halberg looked at the notary. The notary looked at her hands and pretended, kindly, not to notice. He set the codicil down gently on a clean cloth. With the recording, he said. With the capacity examination, with the witness declarations, with the holographic execution, with the contemporaneous nursing notes I understand we'll be reviewing, and with the prior addendum your nursing director already signed. Eleanor, this document is, in practical terms, unbreakable. Eleanor closed her eyes. She looked, for the first time in a long time, like a woman who had set something down. After that Friday, Eleanor began to fade, but only physically. Her mind stayed lit from the inside until the very last week. She talked about small things in those final weeks. Her wedding day, in a borrowed dress, a trip to Lisbon in 1978 where she and her husband had eaten grilled sardines at a tiny restaurant whose name she could not remember, but whose blue-tiled floor she could describe in detail. A lemon cake recipe she made me write down by hand because she didn't trust phones for recipes. I still have that page. The flour smudge is still on it. Roger and Marcy started visiting more often. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. They brought flowers. They posted photos online with captions about cherishing every moment. They held her hand for the camera and let go when the camera was put away. Eleanor accepted all of it with the same calm gentleness she gave to everyone. One evening, when they had just left, she watched the door close behind them and said quietly, I have already forgiven them, Hannah. But forgiveness is not the same as reward. People keep confusing the two. She died on a Sunday night around 11:40. I was on shift. She had been quieter that day, her breathing slower, and I had been checking on her every 20 minutes. The last time I came in, she opened her eyes, looked at me very clearly, and squeezed my hand once. Be brave on Tuesday, she said. I asked her what she meant. She just smiled and closed her eyes. About an hour later, the rhythm of her breathing changed, the way it does, and then it stopped. I sat with her for almost 20 minutes before I called the family. I let them have the room when they arrived. I went into the linen closet, the same one somehow. and I cried as quietly as I could. The funeral was the following Saturday. It was a beautiful service in a stone church on the west side of Hartford. Roger gave the eulogy. He spoke for almost 12 minutes about Mom's sacrifices, about her unwavering devotion to family, about how she taught us the value of legacy. Marcy wore black designer mourning and posted a long tribute online with a black and white photo of Eleanor from the 1960s. Neither of them introduced me to anyone. I sat in the back row, in a plain black dress I'd bought at a discount store the day before. After the service, while people were filing out toward the reception in the church hall, an older woman with silver hair and a soft Irish accent stopped beside my pew. She had kind blue eyes and a small black handbag. "You must be Hannah," she said. I nodded. "She told me about you, dear. I'm Patricia Doyle." She paused, looked toward the back of the church, where Mr. Halberg was standing quietly by the doors. "Tuesday," she said gently. "It's the reading." I understood then what Eleanor had meant. Tuesday came. The reading was held in Mr. Halberg's conference room, on the 8th floor of a building on Asylum Avenue. A long polished table, soft lamps, a pitcher of water, Mr. Halberg at the head, the associate beside him, the notary in a chair against the wall. Roger and Marcy arrived already smug. Mr. Calderon, their lawyer, came in just behind them carrying a thick file. They sat across from Mr. Halberg. They smiled the way people smile when they believe they have already won. Mr. Halberg did not raise his voice once. He produced the holographic codicil. He produced the witness declarations from Patricia Doyle and Margaret Lynn. He produced the audio recording of Eleanor's capacity examination from that Friday, played a 30-second sample of her clear, dry voice, and stopped it. He produced the signed addendum from the nursing director restricting removal of Eleanor's personal items. He produced the contemporaneous nursing logs in my handwriting, dated and initialed. Then he read the new will aloud. The home, to the foundation, the liquid assets, to the hospice, the scholarship, the friends, the widow Doyle, the fixed sums, to Roger and Marcy. Sufficient, not generous. Marcy stood halfway up from her chair before her own lawyer reached over and gently put a hand on her arm. Roger's face went the color of paper. Mr. Calderon cleared his throat. We will, of course, be contesting this. Mr. Halberg slid a thin manila folder across the table. Before you do, he said evenly, you may want to review the following. A copy of the letter dated to a Sunday on which Mrs. Whitcomb was, per the facility's own logs, completing a crossword in pen. A copy of the nursing director's signed addendum, dated and witnessed, regarding Mrs. Whitcomb's verbal authority over her personal effects. A copy of the donations log from the facility, noting a cash contribution by Mrs. Marcy Whitcomb that was originally offered, in private, to a staff caregiver as an inducement to share information. And, finally, an audio recording from a family conference on the afternoon of the 18th, during which a member of the family stated, on the record, "You're already gone, we're just doing the paperwork early." The room was very quiet. Mr. Calderon read the top page of the folder. Then the second page. Then he leaned toward Roger and said, in a voice almost too soft to hear, "We're not contesting this." I sat very still in my chair, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just listened to the air leave the room. In the parking lot afterward, Marcy caught up to me near the bus stop. The sky was that pale washed-out late afternoon gray, and the wind was sharp. "You manipulated her," she said. Her voice was low and shaking. "She was a dying old woman, and you manipulated her." I stopped. I turned to face her. "I brought her warm water for her hands in winter," I said quietly. "I learned how she liked her napkins folded. I corrected the new aide who spoke to her like she was 3 years old. I sat with her the night she died, and I held her hand for an hour after. You couldn't even bring her a phone call on her birthday." The Marcy opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "Have a good evening, Mrs. Whitcomb," I said. I turned. I walked to the bus stop. I did not look back. Behind me, in the parking lot, I could see Roger sitting in the driver's seat of his car, both hands on the wheel, not moving. He sat there for a long time. The bus came. I got on. I paid my fare. I rode home. 8 months later, on a Saturday morning in early autumn, I went to the dedication of the Whitcomb family reading room at a small community education center on the east side of the city. It had been the front parlor of Eleanor's home once. Now it was a quiet, warm-lit room full of donated books and study desks and 3 computer stations for first-generation college students. Mr. Halberg was there. So was the foundation director. So was Mrs. Doyle, in a violet coat, holding a small bouquet. On the wall, just inside the entrance, was a brass plaque. The text on it had been chosen by Eleanor herself. I had not known that until that morning. Character shows up in small, unwatched moments. I touched the plaque once, with 2 fingers, the way you touch the edge of something you don't want to take with you, only acknowledge. That fall, I used the education fund to re-enroll in nursing school, part-time. I kept my job at the facility. I still work nights. I still walk those amber, lit hallways. I still bring warm water in the winter to the residents whose hands ache, even the ones who never ask for it, especially the ones who never ask. There are new residents now in rooms that used to be hers. There is a woman in 14B who reminds me of Eleanor in some ways. Sharp, observant, a little impatient with sloppy grammar. Her family visits twice a year. I sit with her on my breaks. I listen to her the way I learned to listen. What Eleanor taught me, in the end, was this: being underestimated is not the same as being unseen. Calm is a strategy. Dignity is documentation. And the people who treat the powerless with care are very often the people the powerful never bother to watch. Until the day the watching matters. I think about her hand on my wrist on the night of the whisper. I think about her saying, "I have been waiting a long time to be sure of someone." I am not the same person I was before she said that. I don't think I'm supposed to be. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something. Is there an Eleanor in your life? Someone older than you, sharper than people give her credit for, who saw you when nobody else was looking? Or maybe you are the Eleanor, quietly watching, quietly waiting, quietly deciding who is safe and who is not. Either way, I'd love it if you told me in the comments. Use a first name, or don't. Just tell me who they were to you, or who you are to someone else. If this story moved you, a small like helps it find the next person who needs to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet women, real stakes, slow and certain justice, I'd be honored if you subscribed and stayed a while. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. Good night from the night shift.